What is going on? No horsing around family, Colts Nation. This is after further review. And I couldn't think of anybody better than, our favorite, Kevin Bowen, 107.5 The Fan. He's got the morning show. Him and Jake do a great job there. He's been a busy, busy, busy man, but he was nice enough to hop on here for a second. How you been, KB?
Been good, man. Yeah, last night was one for the ages. I don't know if it qualifies in the historic part, but I think you just put it in Canton, and one day you tell your grandkids about that one.
Yeah, man. So, let's just dive right in. I guess topic number one, and we're going to beat a dead horse, Kevin. There's just no doubt about it, but you can't you just turn a blind eye to it. When you talk about this offensive line,
Mm-hmm.
you tried to do some things in an off week. I listened to your morning show this morning driving into work, and you made a great point. A week where you don't even practice, and now you've inserted this shuffle. You've been worried about this communication, and I don't know how you can communicate that very well on a short week. You got to try something. So maybe you applaud Frank Reich for saying, hey, let's try something.
Mm-hmm.
But what he did try last night, Kevin, that did not work. And that's not the recipe moving forward. Huh?
Yeah, Zach. It's a broken offensive line. I don't think there's any way around it. And as we sit here a week from Sunday, outside of Quentin Nelson at left guard, there's nothing I would write even close to Sharpie marker of what you believe in. It is quite the statement they made, though. Does anything admit their concern right now with the offensive line? Then on a short week with no practice time, not only do they put three starters at different spots on the O-line. Zach, you were at Grand Park a decent amount. It's not like we saw that group for any sort of long stretch together. It's not like, Braden Smith had an ankle injury and had missed 2 weeks of camp, so you had to do a different offensive line formation, 5-man grouping for a chunk of camp. You were healthy through those first 12 or 13 practices, and it was the same group every single day. We probably only saw that unit that you saw last night for like 3 or 4 periods out of the 60-some you had at Grant Park. And again, when you get back to practice a week from Monday, you got to decide, are you looking short term? Are you looking long term? Are you looking outside of your building? There's some young guys that haven't played yet. Do you even touch them? Like, there's so many questions I have about that offensive line and what you do come next week against a defensive line who's certainly got the best of you in recent matchups in Jacksonville.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. And my stance has, and we did the instant reaction last night, you got to search under every rock. I know that seems almost impossible, but you're in an impossible situation anyways right now. You're in the middle of a season. Teams don't typically get better at this point. They either stay the same or kind of like we've done, gotten worse, as things have gone along. And I think the things, if you weren't thinking of the contract and the player of the past, of a Ryan Kelly, a Braden Smith, the way they played in the past is not matching up with how they're playing currently, on the football field. They're getting beat. Ryan Kelly went out of the game. You hate to see an injury. And I'm not sure that Pender didn't do a better job, at center, if anybody did.
Yeah, I would start Danny Pinter a week from Sunday. And I don't think that's me speaking in like a 12-hour sort of reaction from last night. Unfortunately, I think Ryan, really ever since the contract extension late 2020, or I guess maybe right before the start of that COVID season, I just don't feel like he's been the same player. And I just think injuries have probably contributed to that. I always feel like he's a bit nicked up. But even then, I don't know if I feel 100% about that. And then, Braden Smith, who I think has been a quality right tackle for you for the most part, now you're moving him back to a position he hasn't touched in 5 years. Bernard Ryman, of course, is a rookie, and go back to camp. It's not like he got much starting run in training camp. I keep on thinking back to those joint practices with the Lions when that Detroit defensive line really controlled, I thought, both of the days, definitely the second day of those joint practices. And, should that have been more of a red flag? I think back to the opening preseason game. Remember that? Kelly had a penalty. Braden Smith had a penalty. I think Pryor got beat for a sack. They're only out there for like one series, but it was like, man, this is out, and you just kind of chalk it up to, oh, it's August. But now here we are, and they're in full scramble mode. And to your earlier point, this is the week to make a change because your bye week doesn't come till week 14. At that point, the season will largely be decided. This is the mini bye. This is the 2 back-to-back divisional games coming out of it. It's kind of now or never almost, not only for that group, but potentially for Matt Ryan's season, potentially for Matt Ryan's health. So what they decide upon come next week is going to be fascinating to see. Does Dennis Kelly get a look? I don't know. Frank didn't seem super confident in him when he got a question on the conference call just a bit ago, but he's a guy that I'd probably look at this point, just given his experience. So, throw a dart at a board right now with those 4 O-line spots outside of Nelson.
Yeah, man. I mean, it's going to be an ongoing thing. Transitioning into, you mentioned Matt Ryan a second ago. Man, sure looks like a guy's got one leg in and one leg out, right? Like, I mean, it just doesn't. I don't see. You can put a lot of this on the line, but he's still making a lot of errors that you just wouldn't have expect. That ball security, I think that's the alarming part for me, as well as when he throws interceptions. Generally speaking, they're bad interceptions. They're not like, oh my gosh, like they really disguised this scheme and it was so good. It's just blatant that no one was there, and there was a lot of coverage around those receivers, and he's just honed in on that receiver, and he's going to throw that football no matter what. And I don't know. I don't know if does Matt Ryan even make it and play that second year in the contract for us?
Yeah, I mean, the $35 million cap hit is probably one of the only reasons that I would sit here and think that he would be back next season. I think it's a great point you bring up is just how those interceptions look. These are not, like you said, super disguised, plays by the defense. This is not even the Carson Wentz picks. And to be fair, Carson threw 7 of them. It's not like he had a big number of them. But like the Wentz interceptions were, I believe I can make the Houdini play. And I have eluded 2 sacks on this play, and I'm going to try and elude a third one, and then I'm going to flip it in the air and pray that Nyheim Hines catches it. Like, it's not even those. It's not a 38-yard pass attempt on 3rd and 16, which is a glorified punt. Last night, the first one, 2nd and 9, just outside of scoring range, a ball's got to be in the dirt. And then the 3rd and 15 on the second pick, that's when you're kind of backed up. That ball was only like 8 or 10 yards down the field. It's like you're getting the first down there. That's another ball that I tweeted out last week. You just got to end drives with punts because your defense is playing good enough to where, and especially last night, if they defend a full field, I don't think Denver's going to move it quite often, if at all. So, part of me is probably just honestly confused, Zach, about Ryan, because like, it's not like when Rivers had his issues in 2020, which I don't think there were a ton of them, but there definitely were some. I felt like it was all physical. It was a guy that was, carrying his bag up the 18th hole, didn't even have a caddy, just like wilting in the heat almost. With Ryan, I mean, I don't want to act like he looks like a spring chicken at 24, but I don't feel like it's all physical. I feel like it's so mental. So then part of me wants to be like, he's got to get that figured out. Like, he's Matt Ryan, he's done something to keep this team around in the fourth quarter and lead them back. Now, granted, he's put them in position for a lot of that. So that is just, it's confusing. It's shocking. It's kind of unforeseen. I thought between the ears, they wouldn't have that issue with him, and it's there. And certainly, I think the support around him is lacking, and he's under siege a lot. But I also think he's brought some of that upon himself. There was a 3rd and 10 late in the fourth quarter last night where they were kind of right on the edge of field goal range. And McLaughlin, he kicked it tremendous. And I felt to myself, okay, this play screams 5 yards, kick the 52-yarder, and move on. And he takes a sack on that 3rd and 10. And you just felt like pre-snap, you could kind of feel it coming from the right side. And gosh, it's just a ball of down, distance, time, score, where you're out on the field. You just would love to see your 15-year vet be a little bit more conscious of those things.
Yeah, I mean, I wrote down in my notes last night, awareness. And I just all caps. I said, we got to hit on that. There's just got to be an awareness. Like, you might expect this from a first-time quarterback or a young quarterback going through growing pains. But if you're Matt Ryan and you're this far into the season, your offensive line is having a really, really difficult time blocking. You got to know in the back of your head that clock is ticking. When you get that ball in your hands, if it's not there, read 1, read 2, read 3. got to get it out, and to just hang on and hang in there and make some of these poor decisions. And it's really been alarming to me, Kevin, that in the last 2 weeks, we've gotten the ball all the way up to the 40-yard line pretty much with ease, in that second half against Tennessee, even against the Broncos. But once we get there, it's penalties, it's turnovers, and it's just taking bad sacks. I think we were in a position of like 3rd and 38. We just
Mhm.
got driven all the way out of our position. That's concerning. You could definitely tell he is frustrated. You saw some of those snaps that they commented in, and he is very, very frustrated with how things are going. And I thought I saw Frank Reich, a more animated version of Frank Reich than I'm used to seeing. I don't usually see him jawing at the refs quite like he did. This was a guy who was just frustrated. What are your thoughts on Frank right now? Like, look, what is his mindset, as we speak, as we're recording this pod on a Friday after a Thursday night game that we won and we should be celebrating? Certainly doesn't feel like Frank's celebrating that victory.
Yeah, I feel like you are him sensing, feeling some of the noise. And how do you not? And then I also think he knows deep down his team has never really been here. 2018 was year 1 and 5. 2021 last year when you got off to a bad start, you were up, 3 scores on Baltimore. Wentz was hurt. You competed with the Rams really throughout all 4 quarters. And right now, if you look at your team, you're 2-2-1. You've played 20 quarters. How many of those 20 quarters have you been the superior team? Yeah. 3, 4.
Yeah.
That's kind of where I would argue. So I think Frank feels some of that. I tweeted this during I guess it would have been the Kansas City week. I felt like that Wednesday presser, he was a little bit more animated, a little bit more agitated, a little bit more body language, talking faster, talking louder. And for Frank, it's very out of the norm. You've certainly sat in on enough press conferences, Zach, that you know full well how subdued he is. And almost times you're like, gosh, I hope everything's okay. I kind of walk away from press conferences like that. And I think this team plays better when they feel a little uneasiness. They're on the edge of their seat. They're not complacent. You're a favorite against Houston. You're a favorite against Jacksonville. You're a favorite against Tennessee. All 3 of those you don't win. You're the underdog against Kansas City. You're the underdog last night, and you're able to win both those games. It's just you would like to see a little bit more of that natural uneasiness created in the other weeks from him, considering he is the head coach. And then I think offensively, 7 straight games now, 20 points or less. That ties the longest streak since '93 for the franchise. Yeah, that's squarely on him. It's squarely on him as a head coach. It's squarely on him as the play caller. I've defended Frank probably more as a play caller than maybe it's the vocal minority on Twitter, but you certainly hear it. And I think there's evidence to back that up. His first 4 seasons, they've been pretty good in scoring the football. But this season, it's been an abomination. And again, personnel, not ideal, but still to not get 20, over 20 in today's NFL when the league is so predicated on trying to help out the offense. And hell, you've played 2 overtime games in that 7-game stretch as well. So this is a big, big breaking point. If you would have lost last night, some change would have had to have happened in the next 48, 72 hours, probably some sort of position coach. But I'm curious now how they react to that. Do they still critically evaluate? Do they sweep it under the rug? Again, this is the mini bye. This is your chance. You don't have the bye week till week 14. Really interested to see what they do.
Yeah, and they got a lot to fix, and they got a lot to fix fast. I wanted to hit on this real quick. Just curious your thoughts. This is the first time I feel like that the Colts community in particular has shifted a little bit when it comes to Chris Ballard. I feel like it's always been when blame's been placed, it's been a little bit Reich ahead of Ballard. I think that, to steal a term from you, water's starting to find its level a little bit, when it comes to those two. And it's almost a pairing and a hand-to-hand type thing at this point. And I call it dumpster diving. I don't know if that's fair, but when you go out and sign a guy who really has no experience at left tackle and paying $5.5 million and essentially give him the job, you don't
Right.
really have any true competition when it comes down to it. That seems like neglect to me, Kevin. That seems like positions that matter. And that's the frustrating part for me as a fan. And now that we put out all of this content, is that he has an unwillingness. It almost feels like he just wants to prove us wrong. I don't know what the agenda is necessarily, but we see how teams win with this, with wide receivers. You got to have multiple pass catchers. You got to have a left tackle. You got to have an edge that can get home, and you got to have a quarterback, as we all know. When it comes down to it, and he's just not been willing to make aggressive moves at those positions. Just curious your thoughts at the state of Ballard and just where you are currently with how things have gone.
Yeah, I always have felt like with him, the biggest question is just when would he tweak the blueprint? When would he adjust? I actually went back and listened to the press conference from January, the season-ending presser, and I asked him that very question. Do you feel like your blueprint needs tweaking, needs adjusting? And he started off with, it's a good question. It's something that I've thought about, but then at the end, kind of the roundabout answer was no. I don't feel like it needs that. I thought the offseason moves had a little bit more in some of those critical position areas. Ngakoue trade would be there. Obviously, the move for Ryan, Gilmore, but still wide out and left tackle, not really at all. And I guess the left tackle one, Zach, is probably the most confusing because, again, that's a position that, he really covets because it's on the offensive line. And, he really handed Matt Pryor and Danny Pinter starting jobs with little to no competition. Ryman was never a serious threat in camp, and Will Fries was never a serious threat to Pinter in camp. So I think that's what people have seen with Ballard is just, I've used the word stubbornness a lot. I think that's where it's at. I mean, clearly from a talent evaluation standpoint, there's been several major hits in the draft, tremendous hits. I mean, hell, like you saw last night. I mean, a guy like Rodney Thomas in the 7th round. I mean, that's what a great 2.5 games that dude's been thrown in the fire without Julian Blackmon. But in this league, there are positions that matter more than most, and it is more of a team that just kind of looks like 80s and 90s. And I don't know if that's the Bears in Ballard coming out, but it's certainly not the Chiefs in him coming out when you look at his background. And that's where I feel like the reluctance and the hesitancy to make that move at quarterback. I always preface it when I bring this up of by no means am I acting like it's easy. By no means am I acting like it's easy to find it. But franchises that take that risk, they're at least giving their fan base and I think their ownership what they want. To me, and I don't want to act like I'm speaking for all fans, but as someone that that diehard, now I'm a college diehard Notre Dame fan, but if you can look at it and think to yourself, man, look at this window. We've got a 5 to kind of 7-year window, maybe even longer, Buffalo and Kansas City's case. But if you have that, that's so enticing as a fan. I think it's so enticing as a franchise to grow within that 5 to 7 years, learn about what it means to be a playoff team. When Peyton and that group got their first taste of the postseason, it was 99. They don't win a Super Bowl till 06. It takes a while. So I think to feel that at times, I think Buffalo is going through some of those stages right now with Allen of a great team, but still you got to feel what the postseason's about. When you go Band-Aid and you got to start over every single year, you can have a season like 2020 where you make the playoffs. Well, now Rivers is gone. And now it's a totally different personality in there and wins. And now it's a totally different personality there with Ryan. And it's going to be a totally different personality and quarterback in there, maybe next year, certainly very quickly thereafter. And it's just a start over at a position that touches the ball every play, is an unquestioned leader, and is the one that gets paid the most. And when you do that, I think your ability to achieve sustained success is limited. And you create a smaller ceiling than what you need to try and create. So yeah, I can think back to that opening press conference and when he says it's not about one player, I sat there and just thought to myself, man, that sounds like a good opening day presser quote. And I'm sure Andrew Luck likes hearing it wherever he is right now. But deep down, full well, oftentimes it's a lot about that one player. And I think until you see that and until you see a little bit more of a focus there, this franchise in this era is always going to have a defined ceiling.
Yeah, 100%. Last question here. One thing I've been thinking about in the last several weeks with what's going on when we talk about quarterback, 2 years ago, Chris Ballard had a press conference in the season, not quite sure if Philip Rivers was going to come back yet. And he made a comment to you guys, and he said, I can go out and get a quarterback, but if I'm wrong, you guys are going to run me right out of town. And I remember immediately when he did that in my notes, I wrote down, oh my gosh, that's job security. That's the very first time I've ever heard Chris Ballard say anything that felt like, that's job security. I want to keep my job. I don't want to make that critical error. But when it comes to the quarterback position, and no one's going to sit here and pretend like that's an easy fix, but you got to do something, not to just sit there and not do anything. A lot of people would say, well, he doesn't want to mortgage the future by getting rid of all these draft picks, trading up, making a big move. But in my opinion, Kevin, you're mortgaging the future if you don't make that big move. Like there is no future. Like I don't know what your future is because football effectively is about winning and losing. Just curious your thoughts on what his approach should be if he is the actual general manager going into next year. Should you draft one next year?
Yeah. I echo probably what a lot of what you just said. I think you're stunting the future. You're not allowing for it to potentially grow and blossom into what you hope it can be. Arguably, I don't know, three of the best teams in the AFC right now: Kansas City, Buffalo, and Baltimore. Not one person can tell me the trade package they gave up to go get each of their three quarterbacks, and they all traded up in the draft to get their guys. It just, if you find it, no one cares. And again, even some of the quarterback in-season decisions have been head-scratching to me, of like Ballard being very anti-Matthew Stafford. That one didn't really, add up in my eyes. I think there are some whispers internally if him and Frank Reich have disagreed on drafting a quarterback at some point in this tenure. And now you're in a position where you go into this draft and, let's say you win 8 games this year, but let's say Houston and Detroit sit there with the first and second pick. I mean, there goes Bryce Young and CJ Stroud 1-2. You still are at the mercy of a lot of teams above you being willing trade partners, and your draft capital, it's not like you have an extra pick. If I'm not mistaken, a lot of these quarterback needy teams have a couple first round picks this season. So I think that is what hurts you. I also feel like, there are points in the franchise over the past few years where, man, wouldn't a young QB learning under Philip Rivers be gold? Wouldn't a young QB learning under Frank Reich? I mean, I know quarterback whisper is not how a term that probably should be used for Frank, but I do think there's a good offensive mind in there. Getting a guy in your system, letting him grow a little bit, I think it'd be advantageous. And I certainly hear people out that look at it and think to themselves, man, as much as you need a quarterback, what about a left tackle in round 1? Or, what about another wideout? Are you definitely going to re-sign, some of these guys that you have coming up? So there are just a lot of questions about where things stand. I guess the last point I'll make is I'm surprised that Irsay signed off on it to the degree that he has.
Yeah.
You would think Irsay, realizing what Peyton and Luck meant to his franchise, and seeing it firsthand with his dad. I mean, I'm not going to pretend to. I was born in '89, so I'm not going to pretend to know, late '80, early '90 Colts. But Jay Query, who I host the morning show with, he rattles off those QBs in that time frame like it's nobody's business, and it's not a great group of quarterbacks. And obviously, more the modern fan can look at Cleveland or look at Miami or look at some of those situations and think, man, there's been a lot of QBs that have gone in and out of those franchises. I would have thought that Irsay would have been a little bit more of because he seems to be patient with that duo of GM and head coach. So wouldn't you want to be patient with a young quarterback with that duo? That to me is just something that hasn't really added up.
Yeah, it's been very, very confusing. And we'll just see, man. It's going to be an interesting season. They got a lot of things to get turned around. 2 big, big, big games coming up with Jacksonville and Tennessee. Effectively, if they don't go 2-0, their season could be really, really long as we go. Guys, you asked for us to get Kevin back on. Nice enough to hop on here and take some time out of your busy, busy day. You got anything going on this weekend, man? You're going to rest up and actually take a break, or is it just full go with Max in the house and just everything keeping you busy?
Yeah, we are kind of at the mercy of when old Max wants to poop and eat, and I guess scream and cry. But no, I'm really excited. So it was my wife's birthday last night, so we're gonna go out to dinner tonight, and then watch my Irish tomorrow night. Big one in Vegas with BYU, and my nephew's birthday as well. So we're gonna head to a birthday party. So I love these Thursday night games just from the standpoint of you do get a free weekend, and
Yeah,
when the bye week isn't until early December, it is nice to have it. And I say this in all seriousness, Zach. These next 2 weeks. I mean, you talk about like critical, monumental October games. You got them. And whatever you think about the franchise right now, these are huge. If you're in the section of the fan base that wants to win the AFC South for the first time in 7 years and have a home playoff game and all that, I totally know there's people there. Or you're on the other side of it that says, screw the winning. You're stuck in mud. You're in QB purgatory. You need to lose. These games are huge. So, yeah, really interested to see how they react from the bye week. Are there drastic changes? And what happens a week from Sunday inside of Lucas Oil?
absolutely. All right, everybody. Thank you guys so much for joining in on this podcast. This has been After Further Review. If you haven't joined the No Horsing Around family, we ask you to hit that subscribe button and hit that bell as we give you the latest updates and live alerts. Until next time, go Colts.